Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us live today online. On behalf of Florence School of Regulation and FSR Global, I would like to welcome you to session 2 of Energy Innovation Week. Today, we're very happy to discuss public financing of green innovation with you. For those of you who are not yet familiar with FSR Global, we invite you to check out our website to discover the work we do in fostering collaborations with energy stakeholders around the world to improve the quality of global regulatory policy by co-creating knowledge that is accessible and actionable. Today, I will leave the floor to your moderators, Miguel and Daniel, in just a second. But first, I would like to stress that we love to engage with you during these sessions, and we have two ways that you can engage with us. First, you can use the chat to introduce yourself, let us know where you're joining us from. We have lots of participants from all around the world today, and then direct your questions to the Q&A chat. So at the end of the session, you will have a chance to get those answers from our wonderful panelists that we have joining us today. So with that said, Miguel and Daniel, I pass the floor to you.
Thanks, yes, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Just a quick word before I give the floor to Daniel. But I think it's important to understand what's let's say the reasoning behind these 3 days. What we wanted to do is to try to, in a way, enlarge the way in which we look at the relationship between investment, long-term investment, and digitalization of energy industries, the introduction of new technologies. Yesterday, we were discussing about the role of digital contracts in facilitating the introduction of new technologies in energy systems. And in a way, we identify, let's say, a bit of a question, at least a challenge, which was digital contracts seem to be very nice for small things, and it's working even in providing access in many parts of the world at affordable rates. But it might be not so easy in big things, let's say capital intensive things. And we were discussing several measures, many of them related to, let's say, tariff design, creating value, showing value to regulators. We want to expand, in a way, this vision today, understanding the role of financing and the role of the design of contracts in providing to the market bankable contracts. So with this, I give the floor to Daniel. And once again, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Miguel. Welcome everybody to the second session of the Energy Innovation Week that organized Florence School of Regulation. The panel of today is titled Public Financing of Green Innovation, Matchmaking of Offers and Demand for Financing. First of all, I'm going to tell you what is the story we are going to talk about. It is usual to talk about energy supply and demand. What we want this time is to look for how to get them together, the capital demand of renewable power plant developers and the money supplied from financial institutions. In today's world, there is an abundance of money, but sometimes they do not cross the supplier of it and investors. In addition, problems have been identified in some countries. Since auctions are carried out, contracts are signed, but the bank financing for electric project is not obtained. We want to find out why this situation happens. To delve into this important topic, we have the participation of 3 panelists, all of them prominent professionals from the world of energy. They are Ottaviano Canuto, Senior Fellow of the Policy Center for the New South, former Executive Director at World Bank and IMF, and also former Vice President of Inter-American Development Bank. Jacqueline Mongrut, Managing Director, All Americas Lixon, ABB, Hitachi, and SNC Lavalin Company. And Garrett Blaney, Chairperson of Comreg of Ireland and former President of the Council of European Energy Regulators, CER, and also former Chairman of the Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulation, ACER. Welcome, Ottaviano, Jacqueline, and Garrett, and thank you for participating in this session. Briefly, very briefly, I tell you the dynamical way we will develop the session. There will be 2 blocks of questions to the panelists, and immediately afterwards, Miguel will synthesize what was discussed by our 3 guests and wrap up the panel. Last but not least, we will have some minutes for Q&A. To do this, we encourage our audience to write their questions during the session using the section for questions, indicating your name, the city and country in which you are located, and if the question is addressed to one of our panelists or to all of them. With further ado, let's start. The first question is for Ottaviano. Hi, Ottaviano. What are the possible roles of public institutions in the risking energy projects? Ottaviano, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. This is really a pleasure. Let me share a couple of slides that might help me in conveying what I would like to say. The point, let me make 2 points, in fact. The first one is exactly to the point of how to de-risk investments, private investments in infrastructure, particularly in the case of energy, so as to crowd in private investment. So the session is on public financing, but the idea here is to think of ways by which the public sector can combine its own resources and the provision of grants and or de-risking instruments, so as to maximize the participation of the private sector. The idea is to combine them both. This has been the object of a couple of works that I did in the past. This one to the left, in fact, it was done while I was vice president at the World Bank. And more recently, as you can see a name here, Miguel Vasquez, we worked together in this policy brief for the T20, that is to say the grouping of think tanks accompanying the G20 discussions. This is is on Africa particularly. So let me state quite what I have in mind. First of all, the first point that we have to take into account is exactly the fact that the world economy and emerging market and developing economies in particular display a gap between investments, infrastructure needs, and its finance. On the one hand, infrastructure investment has fallen far short from what it would be necessary to support potential growth, including in energy. On the other, we have an abundance of financial resources in world markets, which have been facing very low and decreasing interest rates, whereas opportunities of higher return from potential for infrastructure assets are missed. The reasons why interest rates are low for long can be seen in this article that I'm quoting here. So at the same time, we know that there is a missing guy in the global infrastructure finance. To a large extent, one already has the presence of bank loans, of course, also loans from development financial institutions, and equity, but bonds are kind of absent. And this is something that calls attention to anyone. And why is that? The point is that, and I go to what I want to say, if one opens the, let me move on still to one thing more that I would like to say. Well, it's a caveat. as I said, interest rates and financial conditions tend to remain favorable for long-term finance for some time, but one has to take into account that the domestic macroeconomic fundamentals still matter. I included this chart because this shows the shock of the coronavirus on the financial markets in last March, and the recovery afterwards, after the Federal Reserve Bank went all the way to restore financial conditions. But in the case of some emerging markets that are still lagging behind in terms of qualitative fundamentals, like Brazil, South Africa, Colombia, and others, the recovery has not been that much extensive. We're still way to go to return to normal conditions. The point is that you have to use the international conditions favorable to long-term financing, but keeping in mind that there is a homework to be done. Okay, so let me explain this chart. This is a map of the extensive thread of different financial agents that participate or could participate more intensively of the bond financing and of the investment financing in infrastructure. The point is as simple as that. Why do we face this paradox of a contrast between abundant liquidity, search for yield, the necessity of financial institutions to find ways to match their liabilities like pension funds and so on, and we don't have the channeling of those resources to long-term infrastructure investments? One major point that explains partially this is the mismatch between the preference, between the abilities of these different institutions that are listed there, and the corresponding risks that are present in any long-term financial investment in infrastructure. See, we have, if one breaks down the value chain of the service of infrastructure, this could be built in the case of the different segments of energy, for instance. We will see that one agent faces different kinds of risks. Different kinds of risks are prevail at each phase of an infrastructure project. And the financial agents that we mentioned before, they are specialists, or they are more comfortable to deal with some of these risks, but not others. But you have to have the whole thing together. If you don't have the whole thing together, the whole building is not obtained. And then these different agents cannot participate. And so to a large extent, the idea here is that instead of public institutions, be it budget financing of investments, be it development financial institutions providing the funds to build the whole thing, one might have, by using some instruments, the public sector providing that specific need of risk management so as to make possible the building up together of the whole structure. And in that way, multiply the effects in terms of investments, combining public and private investments. That's the idea of the risking. And I will leave that to Miguel, because I know Miguel we work together in the topic for the note that I showed. But so let me jump to the second point that I'd like to bring, which is the role of central banks in this whole discussion. It has also been the object of this paper that is shown there. Well, we don't have to spend much time here to refer to the green finance and the issuance of global sustainable bonds. This has come to stay, and the preliminary reports that I have read more recently are showing clearly how coronavirus has intensified the degree of preference with respect to green finance. Of course, don't be misled by the low figures here, but this has to do, as I said, with the coronavirus crisis. But this chart is a broader one, so it's ESG, so it looks at the environment component, the social, and also the one should add here the ones that cater to governance features. But the point that I want to make is that this is definitely has come to stay and to grow with the rising perception of the relevance of climate change and so on. Fortunately, the younger generations are more aware and more engaged to the issue of. That's why the way to let's say to move ahead after the coronavirus crisis will be to move towards a green recovery of investments. Now, and then you guys, well, where's the central bank on this? Let me lay out 3 reasons why the central banks are starting to become an important player in this game. Now, first point that you guys would make is what the heck has the central bank to do with climate change? There are 3 possible motivations for the engagement by central banks with the climate change agenda: financial risks, macroeconomic impact, and mitigation adaptation policies. And that's where you're going to make a link. This chart shows how, in fact, extreme weather events, floods, violent storms, droughts, and forest fires occurred in all inhabited continents last year. Let me show you the impact of this on finance, on all those events. So central banks can no longer ignore the impact, the financial risks derived from climate on the not only specific assets, but the portfolios of sometimes of financial institutions. And the point is that all major central banks, more proactively or not, more explicitly or not, are taking into account this dimension of the climate change. The European Central Bank, more explicitly, I saw Madame Lagarde right after her assumption at the ECB, mentioning that the European Central Bank made a screening of financial risks derived from climate issues. The Federal Reserve Bank, for political reasons, probably does not state this very much more as explicitly as in the case of the ECB. But I also, for instance, a couple of months ago, I participated at an event, virtually, of course, in California, organized by the Federal Reserve, the Fed of California, and clearly the degree of technical analysis and incorporation of financial risks is gone very, very high. But also the central banks are taking into account that the second prong of climate change impact on finance, which is the macroeconomics. Now, no longer one federal central bank can no longer ignore the macroeconomic effects of what I referred to previously, which is the rising relevance of climate-related actions. And then I go to finalize to my third prong.
We're running short, Daviano.
Okay, and that's the last one. The last point about the central banks is, as I said, the abundance of liquidity and the unconventional monetary policies have become conventional, as Claudio Borio has recently said, and quantitative easing is here to stay for a long time. And in that regard, Madame Lagarde has referred to criteria on how to, on areas where to provide liquidity support through quantitative easing, and climate change related investments in infrastructure and bonds are obviously the point. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabiano. Daniel, just a second, because I think this is very, very interesting and very, in a way, related to what we're discussing and we will discuss. I mean, we're trying to facilitate investment in new technologies, especially the new ones that are related to sustainability. So we're introducing a new dimension with respect to yesterday, which is it's not only about revenue streams, it's not only about securing money directly, it's about risks. And to do that, we need to take into account, very importantly, the different players, the ecosystem of people providing finance. No, we will speak more, but we have another view now, a little bit in contrast, which is it might be not necessary just to provide public mechanisms. We could have increased efficiency within the firms. And Jacqueline hopefully would speak about it. Daniel.
Thank you, Miguel. Before I ask the question to Jacqueline, I just want to take a second to remember our audience that they can start writing the question for our panelists in the section of Q&A we have in the Zoom, so we can take minutes at the end of the session for the panelists to ask it. Please remember to write your questions. So welcome, Jacqueline. I want to ask you if you think, do we need to develop new public bureaucracies, or maybe internal evolution of organizational capabilities are able to do the job? Jacqueline, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So thank you very much, Guy. Thank you, Miguel, to bring me on board. You know, I have more than 25 years experience driving companies in North America. So you have to be very focused and try to deliver specific points. For me, for sure, internal revolution is key and is mandatory for 3 specific points. First, we need to focus on customer and company needs. The internal revolution is going to increase the organization capabilities, and we need to focus on that. Bank will provide money if we increase productivity, and will provide money to the more productive companies. So from my point of view, we have 3 major points, which is the growth acceleration. So we need to identify how we can develop new markets, how we can develop new segments and be more effective on sales in order to grow, organic or non-organic. Then the second one is an internal revolution. So in this case, we need to identify all the companies around us, and internally we see where we can improve our process, our internal, reduce time on process, increase our capabilities, reduce more time less on operation and service performance, productivity. So this is the major point. And the last point, which is, I think, very, very, very important, is how you can leverage on technology, how we can change our point of view and digitalize operation in order to decrease time and process, to be more competitive on the market. So let's bring an example, specific example. If you see Google campus, you know, the Google campus in California, you can see a huge statue of a T-Rex. It's a dinosaur, the huge one, the T-Rex one. And around this dinosaur, you can see a lot of pink flamingos around. And the question is why they have this thing. It's very easy. You have to reinvent yourself. Why? Because in the company, if you are not able to reinvent, you're going to disappear without a trace, like a dinosaur. Huge like a T-Rex, they disappear because they keep themselves always in the same way. Flamingos have existed in this world for more than 30 million years, and they've been transformed several times, and they remain alive. So this is the target that we can do every time. And in this world, with all the blockchain, big data, and all the capabilities on intelligence behind the data, we can revolutionary transform our company. I did in my past life. And it's not a question of how to change systems. It's like, for example, you can have 8 systems and you're going to have a mirror, only one system to attach all the information and can have a picture of all your operations so you can decrease time and it does mean decrease money and be more effective. So internal revolution is key. So don't forget that you have 2 main reasons why you're going to do that. I explain what we have to do, now why we have to do that. The most important is customer, so internal and external customer. The company has to focus on the essential with this customer satisfaction. And the second point is employee development. Employees development, the right person in the right place. Without that, any company can change anything. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Jacqueline. It was, I mean, it's very interesting because, in a way, what Ottaviano was putting forward was a world made of projects, let's say, and what you're saying is a different way of developing, let's say, technology or investments, which is through a relatively big corporate that needs to evolve over time. And this is fun because introduces very well the last intervention from Gareth, which is many of the smaller companies are blaming regulators because customers are hidden and they cannot develop this customer value. They need to grow, which is what you need to get the financing pointed out by Ottaviano. So, Gareth, you have the opportunity to close with the show all these questions from a regulatory point of view, no, Daniel?
Yeah, yes. The third question is exactly for Gareth. Hi, Gareth. What we want to ask you this time is what you think about if there are public policies in place, say innovation or industrial policies. Is there a rationale for the regulator to design technologies specific mechanism to promote energy investment? Gareth, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you, Miguel. I think you've set this up very nicely. I'm in some ways, what I'll do is talk about both Ottaviano and Jacqueline and the various areas that they've mentioned already. Ottaviano mentioned a lot about risk minimization, particularly from the investors. I think what I'd like to talk about, and I think for regulators, we also need to think about risk mitigation for the consumers and the customers. So, entering into long-term contracts, if you don't get that right, you can end up with stranded costs that will be paid for by consumers and customers for many years. And if you don't get the right choices at that time, then you'll end up with extremely high prices and frustrated customers in the process. So picking up on Jacqueline's point, I think there's a couple of basic parameters that we use as regulators to try and help us, devise as much as we can or advise others to devise policy interventions. One of them is the concept of technological neutrality. So the idea is that we don't, if at all possible, pick one technology versus another. So if we take, for example, the changes in solar technology or wind technology over the last 10 years have been vast. We've seen panels reduce, we've seen battery costs reduce, we've seen reintegration of those, we've seen offshore wind come down significantly in price compared to onshore wind as turbines get higher and get better resource utilization. And Jacqueline mentioned about digitalization. This is a key thing for energy. And I can see now, having left energy and moved into the telecom sector, the pace of change of digitalization is phenomenal. And the energy sector needs to tap into that utilization and to do it in a secure way. And Ottaviano mentioned about, cybersecurity. There are many different new risks as we go through digitalization. But when it comes to the policy and the public policy, one, we should try and use as much as possible the market. And this is the second principle that regulators use: technological neutrality, and use market forces as much as we can. Now, if somebody wants to come in without any intervention and make what they call a merchant, investment, we should not frustrate that. We should facilitate that. But let's be realistic. In spot markets, where the spot market now is going negative in many places and will continue as more investment comes in to go more negative, it's very difficult to make a merchant investment in renewable technology. But that doesn't mean we say no to the market. We just use the market in more limited ways. And auction design has been very successful. But as much as possible, where do regulators sit in this? Should we be designing the auctions? Should governments design the auctions? And I think it's very important. And I think as regulators, we feel we've got a lot of expertise. And it's useful to use that expertise to share with governments, because more and more of these are becoming government decisions. The governments are the ones who are democratically elected. If they get it wrong, they're the ones who's going to be thrown out of power. So it's important that the social dimensions to these decisions, that they can feel that they have control over that. But I would argue that regulatory input to that, and using all the expertise of regulators to make sure that we come up with what they call smart targets. So what do I mean by smart targets? That's specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's realistic, and it's timely. So we can help decide those targets, because the target is the thing that will drive the mechanism. And if you get the target right, if you get it technologically neutral as much as possible, if you can try and de-risk as much as possible, we'll end up then with an outcome that ultimately benefits consumers. And I think that the last thing is probably the lens through which good regulation will always look. What's the net benefit for consumers in all of this? And I'll finish up on that.
Very nice.
Thank you.
I think it closes very well the reasoning. Well, Daniel, if you want to say, I don't know if you have something to add.
No, please, Miguel, we'll go in advance with the second block.
Because yes, I was thinking, because this is really on the table. Instead of talking about experimentation directly, I think we could show the slide I have for, or even better, let's run the poll right now. Then I'll comment on the slide, and then we will have a last round of comments, because I think it's very interesting, the combination of views we have here. Would that possible? Yes. Mm-hmm. Because in a way, what we've seen is the complex combination of many players doing stuff. So the first thing I wanted to ask the audience to have a grasp of what they're thinking is, after these interventions, what kind of public intervention do these new technologies we're talking about, in a way, what we were talking yesterday also about facilitating the development of new stuff, either by digital contracts or other ways. The three possibilities I'm putting here, a bit biased, is the first one is securing project revenue stream. Somehow this more traditional way of doing things, even using auctions and so on. The other way, the second way could be what Ottaviano was commenting, the provision of debt instruments by multilaterals, cheap ones, to facilitate the stuff. And the last one is the risking financial structures of these projects. What do you think? I cannot.
Just 20 more seconds to get your votes in. Make sure to let us know what you think.
Good. This dramatic pause you always do, it's killing me. Yes, yeah, you always take like 3 seconds to answer. I never know if you're there.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Let's, I'll share the results. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, when I say that was expected. When I said optimize, I was kind of driving people to say that that seems good, no? And I think that's okay. Yes, we all agree in that the risk in structures is important. What we need to understand is how to do that. And I think we have a next the slide I prepared that also was in Ottaviano's presentation. I think helps to give a map of all the things or most of the things we're discussing here. No? And first of all, I want to point out that what Gareth was saying about the role of regulators and so on, and was a lot what was discussed yesterday by Hadley of C4All, has to do with revenues, market design, probably through auctions, some kind of revenue stabilization, even grants via tariffs. This is something that helps people to deal with revenues, but it's not all. And for that, we prepared in our paper a very, let's say, schematic representation of a project. Okay, this is a new or old technology project where you have a construction phase. All risks are here and no revenues yet. And then you have the operation phase where most of the costs are spent in you start having revenues. And what I want to show, what I want to convey very quickly is that the amount of instruments we have goes beyond the design of markets, design of tariffs, and design of, let's say, incentives for revenue. And to improve the conditions, you have mechanisms related to equity, you have mechanisms related to debt. That was shown by Ottaviano very clearly. You have mechanisms to deal with foreign exchange, which some places, especially when capital markets are not very deep, it's very relevant. Credit enhancement, which is equally important in many places. And then you have things to deal with capex, guarantees, insurance, etc. So as we see, we have a large amount of mechanisms that can be used to facilitate this kind of project. And for that, we need to somehow choose who is going to benefit from that. And for me, it was clear that we have some, as Taviano said, sustainable bonds and are here to stay. But to do that, we need to put together many people to define what's sustainable. Gareth was explaining that very well. You need to be technology neutral, but not so much. Not any technology, but you shouldn't pick a winner. And that's extremely difficult. And probably for that, which is the point of many of these events, is you need experimentation. We need to put together corporations to understand what kind of processes, what kind of innovation ecosystem, what is sometimes called open innovation, as Jacqueline was saying, what kind of measures we need to develop that. We need to understand market rules and how can we design them to, let's say, define a technology facilitating environment without picking a winner or find a winner. And all that combined in a way that people like Ottaviano can deal with that and understand the risks and design the structure, the financial structures we need for that. I think if we can do a final round with our speakers very quickly, 1 minute, say 1 minute reaction to what I said, and then we open the Q&A, it would be great. What do you think? Like, we can begin with Ottaviano, who is the first speaker and our financial expert here, to see in a way, Ottaviano, what do you need if you what as a banker you expect from Gareth as regulator and Jacqueline as a corporation.
Well, thanks, Miguel. Well, the fact is that the major challenge, these types of interaction among agents, including the public, someone from the public sector, is the issue of governance, of due establishment of responsibilities with accountability and transparency. That's the key. One of the reasons why, as we all know, public-private partnerships all over the world sometimes have failed. They have to do with shortcomings of the governance structure, which allowed for capture and so on. So I do think that the particularly as there will be over time, there has to be a sort of a collective learning process in which some trial and error will inevitably be. Some ideas will be tested. Most of them hopefully will work out, but occasionally we will all learn with the failures and mistakes. So there's no way to avoid the collective learning process. And at the same time, obviously, any endeavor such as this has to involve, suppose, some prior consultation. A regulator is not a god. It follows rules. It has clear governance patterns, but it is not from the divine headquarters. So there has to be some consultation, some conversation, along which, of course, the regulator cannot be let prey to capture. But there is a collective learning process involving regulators and the subject to regulation in all sectors, and the key variable there will be the quality of governance, transparency, and accountability.
I assume, Gareth, you don't agree with "you're not God"? Any reaction here?
We're definitely not gods as regulators, no. And I think we need to change. I think, Jacqueline's point about, regulation, and the digitalization and reinvention, regulators need to be part of that process. So, this is something we had recognized in Europe, that dynamic regulation is something we need to do more. I think also cooperation, and I might say this as having become a telecoms regulator, being an energy regulator, but I've learned a lot from looking at another sector and comparing and contrasting the sectors. But it's not just telecoms, it's competition, it's transport. There are many different parts of regulation, and the changes that are needed for society to become more sustainable need all those different pieces to work together. And we'll also need legislators to facilitate that, because we're still a creation. If we are a creation at all by anyone, the God is the legislators. They're the ones who create the tablets of stone that we will be held accountable to. So we're very much have to stay within that legislation. So the legislation needs to also facilitate regulators working more closely together. But I think that in terms of innovation, it's really about being clear about the targets again. What is it that we're trying to achieve? They say that necessity is the mother of invention. The clearer we are about the necessity, the better the invention. So I think it's really important that we have very clear targets of what's trying to be achieved, and then let the market be the determinant of how that gets achieved.
Okay, Jacqueline, you in the middle of the other two, dealing with regulators and bankers. What do you? Any reaction there?
Yeah, sure. I'm 100% agree. First, Octaviano, with the governance, I think is a key element. If we talk about Americas, for example, it's like so important because we need to reinvent the governance. We need to establish clear process on how to reduce time. This is extremely important. I have more than 25 years experience on energy, and I can tell you we can do it because I did it. So digitalization, as you say, Garrett, is key. You know, reinvent ourselves is the second pillar that we have to do it. And I would like to add another different dimension, which is the diversity and inclusion. In technology and in energy, 50% of the workforce are women. So last year, 60% of the university graduated were women. But we only have 25% in IT or energy. And it's the worst. If you go up and up, only 2% of women going to reach a position talking about more on operation, VP and CEO, 2%. That means, and it's not only that, only 2% also of the venture capital funds are startup founded by women. That means 98% is founded by men. I'm not feminist. I only want to say that it's extremely important because our brains are built in a completely compatible way. We are complementary. And if we are not putting our time and effort to develop this part of our business, it's going to be a big problem in the future. I can tell you, I live in Montreal, but I was born in Latin America. So more than 30 years in North America, it's not easy. When I reached my first position, when I was 30 years old, as a woman, general manager in a huge company in energy, everything was set for failure because, you know, it's very difficult. So we have this responsibility to bring this added value on diversity. And why? Because you are going to have more effective, it's proof that you're going to increase your margin, you're going to attract more customers because customers either are diverse, and you're going to keep this 50% of the labor there that you can attract in your company. It's part of the revolution of the innovation and complement for the digitalization piece.
I think Daniel, we can open for the brief Q&A. I'm not sure if you're tracking questions.
Yes, Miguel. We have questions for each of our panelists, so we're going to start to win the time. We have another 10 minutes of session. The first question is to Jacqueline, and it comes from Niamin Seleke from USA. Niamin asks, what is the role of sustainability and resilience, even more so in the face of a turbulent change and climate change in the revolution that you present? Are they not priorities for companies to survive and thrive? What is your take, Jacqueline?
So thank you very much for this question because I'm passionate for climate change. So it's critical. You know, it's again part of how we can change and rethink our business each time. Environmental, the well-being at home. So how we can think in a different way, because most of the people want to work from home. All the mental illness that we can have in the future is related to the sustainability of the company. And again, we need to focus on what is the best way to leverage on your people, on your employees. It's so key. If we are not able to manage at distance, it's going to be critical for the future because you are not going to be able to manage the growth. If we're not able to, it's not only climate change, it's everything related to our environmental. This month, we had a countdown is a new initiative for climate change. I've been part of this presentation. Was amazing because you can see every single people can do something, because we are always waiting for somebody else to do something for us. But if we start to doing small things, I always say that life is a small detail. So deliver every day something, and we're going to change the world. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, I think it goes to Ottaviano. It's asked by Saddam Mohamed Sodi from Niger in Africa. And the question is exactly about what happens in this continent. So Saddam asks, how can public sector contribute to the risking structures to attract more investments in the renewable energy in Africa? Can digitalization work in Africa? Please, Ottaviano.
Yes, Saddam, I would strongly recommend giving a look at the joint paper that I prepared with Miguel and with a colleague from the Policy Center that I mentioned in one of my slides. You don't have to remember it there, but go to the website of the T20, that is to say the grouping of think tanks. This year, as G20 is being headed by Saudi Arabia, it's easy to find the website, and we'll find there our document is exactly mired at Africa, and we provide there, right, Miguel? We provide there some examples on what to do in some projects, including in energy and telecommunications, that the multilateral institutions and or public sectors can do the risking. You will find there several specific examples.
Thank you. And we have another question here. It comes from Jofilin Beyumula, and it's for Garrett. Garrett, the question is this. The role of regulators are truly important. However, smart target remains to be a challenge in most of least and developing countries, especially due to high investment risk, both to consumers and producers, as well as initial investment capital. From your experience, neglecting the named challenges, what are the best approaches to address the scenario in developing countries?
Thanks, Daniel. And I think one of the things, and Daniel, you yourself have been a key advocate for this, is close collaboration between energy regulators across the globe and sharing best practice. And that international collaboration has been really helpful. I think the challenge in developing countries is to try and make sure that the targets are not too complicated, that they're simple, and that as much as possible, they're de-risked. Already developing countries have a challenge of trying to attract low-cost capital, so they have higher risks to start with. So making sure that the risks are lower is certainly helpful, but also that it's appropriate technology. And interestingly, this discussion about Africa, and I worked with the IEA and Fatih Birol to look at digitalization in the energy sector. And what struck me was that Africa is a leader in some areas in terms of DC standards, applying DC networks rather than AC networks, using solar technology that's enabled through telecoms infrastructure to have pay-as-you-go models. There's a lot of really interesting new innovation happening in developing countries like Africa. So it's extremely important that the targets are set for the needs of the people in those countries. And this maybe goes back to Jacqueline's point about ensuring that we have diversity. Diversity is extremely important because the consumers of the energy are diverse. And if we want to truly reflect those consumers, we need to embrace diversity as regulators and to ensure that we don't lose that diversity and that we get the appropriate responses for the appropriate consumers.
Thank you. I found another question here. I think it goes to Ottaviano, and it's from Albin Babendorfer. Albin asks, why has in development cooperation already in 2007 guidelines for including climate change in all investment projects, whereas only now, around 12 years later, this is starting to take hold for investment in developed countries. What do you think, Ottaviano?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is inevitably a time lag between the discussions, debates, preliminary standards, and their application. Look, I spent 15 years working at the World Bank and IMF and IDB, and I've seen this. The first time one talk I heard about specific guidelines for sustainable banking and so on was back in 2004, 2005. But then you have the consultations, you have the process. Any change of the in that direction touches on vested interests, so there is some resistance. It's never a smoothing play, and it's a pity, but it is like it is. Also, the shift in opinions and the public support and of the population and so on also takes long. Sometimes one needs events. That's why I made reference in my presentation to the catalytic effect that the coronavirus has had on climate change perception. People have realized that nature, if scared, may give us, a punishment, and instead of otherwise, instead of replacing the propensity to consider the climate change issues, has risen with the coronavirus crisis. So inevitably, it takes time, and there is a trial and error. We talk about green regulation. Today we call it green regulation, but the principles of Equator, for instance, that were laid out by IFC back in the beginning of the millennium, only now they have been full-fledged into broader guidelines and green funding.
Good.
Thank you.
Danny, I think we need to start wrapping up this. Well, before thanking all of you to attend, I'm very happy with this round of questions because several important things have been very clearly stated. Diversity, for one, is very important, and it's very nice because this is an important initiative of the Florence School of Regulation. I'm sure Jess is going to tell you more about this. Cooperation among regulators globally, as Gareth said, is super important for especially the Florence School of Regulation global area, who is organizing or hosting this event. So I'm very happy about the comment. And finally, just closing with the last answer or the last question even. I think this taking time thing is very related to what we're discussing here. It's important to solve problems, but we need to understand that the solutions are complex and involve a huge amount of different players. Cooperation in the definition of what's sustainable. That's something that I know, for example, in Europe, is taking a lot of time of very intense work. So not observing definitions or including sustainability is many times related not to lack of work or lack of political will, but the need of technical discussions on the definitions and on the products we need for that. I think it's the best way of introducing the Thursday session, which is essentially that we need to understand how to develop green finance, green products, and how regulators need to react to that, and how companies will react to that. Because if we say if we define very stringent conditions, business will not thrive. But if we don't define anything, it's going to be very difficult. We need, again, to find a trade-off, and we will discuss that on Thursday, hopefully with all of you. So I shut up now. Thank you very much all. It's been super interesting, and I will circulate with Daniel a summary of what we've said, and hopefully you all like it. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.
It was a great session.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.